Alright guys, it's time to use what we've learned about CSS Grid to create a masterpiece. I want to introduce you to somebody who loves a CSS Grid probably more than anyone, and that is Mondrian. He is a Dutch painter who has created masterpieces that you might have seen before. And they look like this one, composition number 3 with red, blue, yellow, and black, which is not a very creative name, but it is a beautiful painting, especially if you're really into grids, which he is. But also, it seems like a lot of other people are, because this piece was auctioned off for a whopping $50.6 million. So I hope you're glad that you started this section and learned about CSS Grid too. Now, I've created a graphic that breaks down all of the dimensions of each of the elements in this grid. And I've measured everything up with a ruler so that we can create a realistic to scale version of this painting using CSS Grid. If you want to create a different painting because he's created lots of these compositions, and you don't want to use my measurements, that's totally cool as well. You can simply Google image search Mondrian compositions, and if you look in the images tab, you'll see a whole bunch of different ones that he created. And you can pick one that you like. There are ones which are super complicated, and there are ones which are really, really simple. But if you're doing it this way, then you'll probably have to judge by eye the sizes of the tracks, for example, the rows and the columns. But remember, this is a project, so it's totally up to you whether if you want to do the version that I've measured up for you, or do a completely separate one, or do both, or make lots and lots of different paintings. It's totally up to you. Go ahead and download the starting files for the Mondrian project. And if you take a look inside the index.html, you'll see that I've added some of the hex codes for the colors in this image. And that way you can actually get a more realistic version of the painting. So everything should be pixel perfect, measured colors, and this is what you would end up with if you followed all of the colors in here and the dimensions in this dimensions.png. Using what you've learned about grid, either use my dimensions and colors to create this final goal website, which you'll notice is actually even centered on screen. So think about how you might do that. Or you can pick one of the other paintings, any of his paintings, and use CSS Grid to see if you can figure out how to recreate it, but in a website. Pause the video now and give this project a go. All right, so the first thing you'll notice is that there's no HTML written for you and there's no CSS. So you're going to have to write everything completely yourself. If we take a look at our solution, you can see that we've created as many divs as there are squares on the painting. If I go ahead and show preview, and I open this up as a website, you'll see this is our final solution code masterpiece, which I actually think looks really, really pleasant. I might just print out a copy and put it on my wall because it is really beautiful. If we look at this, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 divs in total. And that's exactly how many I've added into the CSS Grid container. Now, because some of them are different colors, I've added some classes onto them, but most of the layout actually occurs in the container class. I specified a height and width according to the dimensions in the dimensions image, and then set it to display grid. Now, I gave the whole thing a background color because remember I said we can't actually change the color of the lines, but we can create a gap so that the background actually shows up. That's a little trick that I figured out. There's probably other ways of doing this, but hopefully you've seen that hint from me, and if you didn't, maybe you've worked it out yourself. Next, I created the columns and the rows and specified fixed sizes because these dimensions are super crazy. And basically I looked at all of the different columns. So this is column number 1's width, this is column number 2, number 3, and number 4. 4 columns in total because these are actually going to be 2 different items. So I had to split this into 2 columns, and this spans 2 columns and this spans 3 columns. That's how I figured it out. Row wise, we've got one row here, another one here, another one here, and finally the last one here. So 4 rows and 4 columns. And then I specified a gap of 9 pixels, which will show up as the black lines. And then I gave everything by default the background color of the white, and each individual item, if they were colored differently, I would give them the colors that they needed. Based on the positioning of some of these, for example, this big white block actually needs to span 3 columns. So these 3 columns, and I use the grid column property to create that look. And then the second white one spans 2 rows vertically, because we have these 4 rows. Taking up these 2 is a grid row span 2 job. For the third white cube, I decided to use a grid area because it seemed easier to define, but you might have used something else. And the rest of the solution code should be pretty straightforward. Now, hopefully you managed to achieve this. This involved a little bit of remembering how we size our grid tracks, how we lay out and position our items in our grid container, and finally, how to center an item inside the middle of the screen using Flexbox. Hopefully you managed to figure out all of these things. If not, be sure to review the relevant pieces of content in this section. And now you should know how to use Flexbox, how to use Grid, and how to use them together in order to create beautiful masterpieces, but also complex web layouts. So hope you had fun in this section, and I'll see you in the next one.